Welcome to Forward Thinking, because the world is moving fast, the world of work also needs to. Over the past 5 years or so, we've seen an immense amount of change in the UK and globally. We've had the pandemic, Brexit, and a cost of living crisis, all of which is taking its toll on the UK workforce. Organisations are still coming to terms with hybrid working, with some organisations opting to bring staff back full-time, others opting for a hybrid working model. And alongside that, we're seeing the UK is not getting any healthier. Recent estimates suggest that by 2040, 9 million people in the UK are going to be living with poor health. Also, the ONS is showing that productivity and rates of economic inactivity are low. And this is something we're seeing in Britain's Healthiest workplace data, which is revealing that over the past 10 years or so, we've seen low productivity almost double. So all of this we're going to be exploring today, digging into why looking after staff and employees in the present day is more important than ever, and why that's ultimately not just good for people and the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. We've got Dame Professor Carol Black with us, and Maggie Alphonsi, Director of the Vitality Performance Champions. I'm not going to ask you to list off your entire list of credentials, because otherwise we'll be here all day, given the amount you've both achieved. So in a sentence, please, could you introduce yourself today?
I'm Carol Black, and in a sentence, I advise different departments of government on health and wellbeing. I chair the What Works Centre for Ageing Better, so we all get to grow old and still be active and well. And perhaps also relevant, I do work on illicit drugs as the government's advisor on combating drug misuse.
A long sentence, but we got there. I think it needed a long sentence. Maggie, and yourself?
It's very hard to follow, Dame Carol, but I'm a former athlete, sport that used to play as rugby union, represented England, winning a Rugby World Cup back in 2014, because it's a long sentence. I now work in broadcasting as well as working for Vitality, and I guess most of my work is very much around improving the governance in sport, but also trying to improve diversity and inclusion in sport.
Full stop.
Full stop, done.
Wow, I mean, the two longest sentences and two incredible speakers we've got here today. So, Dame, please kick us off, Dame Carol Black. Could you please give us a bit of an overview of the macroeconomic landscape and how healthy is the UK workforce today?
Well, Adam, it's been a roller coaster, I think we should say, both for the employer and for the employee, because if you look at the overall figures, our employment rates are going down, our sickness absence are higher than 2008. We have more young people with mental health problems and not in the workplace. And we have, sadly, more people in work, but not able to work to their best ability because of a health-related problem. So these are big things, but I wouldn't like to have us depressed. So I want to mention some of the good things that have happened since the pandemic. If you think about it, the pandemic put health and well-being right at the top of the employer's list of things to do, followed by psychological safety, mental health, and then there's flexible working, which is a word I actually prefer to really any other word. Can you work really flexibly? Managers have had to change how they manage. Leaders have had to become more empathetic. We've done more on technology and AI, and occupational health has gone up the agenda, and I think we're better at EDI. So I think we should balance it. We've got these huge challenges of poor productivity, more sickness absence, more people not at work, economic activity, inactivity rather, on the rise. But I think we need a balanced picture.
Yes, it's almost fair to say that in the past 5 years or so, we've seen almost the same amount of change you'd expect to happen in 10, maybe even 20 years, and we don't seem to be seeing that rate of pace, that breakneck pace that we're seeing change happening, kind of come down at all. Maggie, I mean, some of the things that Carol just walked us through there are incredibly interesting. What about sort of the workplace and kind of that point that Carol made around leadership? I mean, how has the role of the leader changed, and then how has that Why is that so important to creating healthier, happier, more productive workplaces?
Yeah, so really interesting points that Carol's picked up on. I think we talk about the workplace, it has evolved, especially in particular with regards to what the changes we've had to deal with in society. And it's had a huge impact on the workplace now. I feel like workplaces are going through this change, but it's actually how do we create a positive culture where we encourage people to want to come into the work environment, to want to feel like they can bring their whole selves into this environment that we are trying to create. So I feel like that has changed over time. I feel like leaders aren't necessarily at their perfect sweet spot at the moment because they're grappling with quite a lot. But I do feel there's a real need to change and want to change.
Dame Carol Black, so on that then, first of all, I mean, all of that is fantastic, right? And we can all accept that's incredibly important. But how important is it to communicate the importance of health and well-being in the workplace? You mentioned earlier that it's a little bit easier now because actually attitudes have changed and employers are much more aware of the need to care for their staff. We saw that throughout the pandemic and beyond. But rather than taking it as a given, why is it so important that workers are happy, healthy, in good health?
Well, if for no better reason, your bottom line. So as far as an employer is concerned and the finance director, they're going to worry about the bottom line. There's very good research evidence that if you invest in the health and well-being of your workforce, they're more productive. And so it has a very good financial tag on it. But also, if you invest, people will become more engaged. They will enjoy their work more. And you don't want unhappy, miserable people coming to work. You want them to feel they're doing something worthwhile and that you are investing in them in whatever way it is, and they can feel they trust you and they will go that extra mile. So it's on all levels. If an employer has to be persuaded, I would use the financial argument, but there are many, many. And also, you attract staff, I think young workers particularly, they may want to know what they're going to earn, but my goodness, they also want to know what is this company about. They're interested in your ethical investing. They're interested in whether you care about climate and sustainability. So there are lots of things, I think, that come into this issue, but it's a no-brainer.
Can I just jump on the back of that? I think the whole element of investing is so important because, like you just touched on, when someone feels like they're investing in you, there's like a contract. I owe you now. Yeah. Because you're investing in me, I owe you, and I will go above and beyond. And as a result of that, I will commit to you. And that's really important, isn't it? When you feel like you're really genuinely committing to an organisation, a business, you will do more. You will want to do more and you enjoy doing more. Yeah, and that's another thing, obviously vitality is significantly good for what we encourage, the whole healthy and happy environment. And that whole, you come in, you've got food provided. I feel like you're investing in me. The environment that we're in we're in beautiful surroundings right now. This is perfect. So I feel quite happy with the surroundings that I'm in. So all of a sudden I want to give more. I want to come into the office and vice versa, greater productivity as a result of that.
That virtuous circle.
Yeah.
Ultimately, good for its people, good for its business as well, and that's better for everybody. There's so much to dig into, and there's so many other points I wanted to dive into. But before we do, I'm going to cut to Rob Harvey, our advisor editor, and Gary Impett from Vitality, and they're going to dig a little bit more into the BHW data, Britain's Healthiest Workplace, and then we'll come back and we'll reflect on some of the findings.
Thanks very much, Adam. So I'm joined by Gary Impett, Head of Corporate Sales at Vitality. And Gary, you've been really closely involved with our research, Britain's Healthiest Workplace, over the last few years. And looking over our most recent findings, I think we can kind of see that, unfortunately, there are some kind of big productivity losses arising from sort of deteriorating employee health and well-being. Perhaps you could just give us a little bit more of a kind of flavour of what those findings are showing us this year.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, they're showing a deterioration. They have shown a deterioration over the last 10 years. You know, we're actually at almost 50 days lost productivity per employee per year. And that is huge. And I think when you start looking at the context of that, and you start looking at the working days that you have, 225 days, something around that, to take 50 days pretty much out of your working life, working kind of year, is huge. It's significant. So yes, it's not just us. The Office of National Statistics are seeing exactly the same trends coming through as you'd expect. And just to put it into context, maybe at the start of this, 190,000 employees have filled out this sort of questionnaire. So these statistics that we're talking about, these trends that we're talking about today, are very, very relevant and very real.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. This is 10 years that we've been running that service. There's a lot of data there that's kind of that we've got access to that show some of these trends. And I think one of the things that sort of jumped out at me looking at those findings is that in particular we kind of see that deteriorating employee health and well-being has been driven by some kind of, to some extent, some modifiable, preventable lifestyle risks, things like obesity and this sort of stuff.
To a lot of extent, Rob, and that's, if there was an upside to this, that is a very big upside, right? We could, if we could modify some of our lifestyle choices, so every day I get up, I've got a choice what I do. I can eat unhealthily, I could do some activity or not, as the case may be. I might smoke, I might drink. So all of these sort of behavioural choices that we have through the day make a very, very big impact on productivity. And when we sort of talk about sort of the productivity sort of gap between how healthy somebody is and how unhealthy somebody is, it's significant on an individual basis. So we talk about that. So the most healthy people are still losing around sort of 23, something like that, days a year, lost productivity. But the least healthy people are losing sort of up to 80 days a year. And when you look at those lifestyle choices, they make this huge impact on reducing that. So it's positive for an employer. We could do something about it and change that productivity gap.
Yeah, I guess it's so important, is it kind of almost being aware of some of these. I think I saw that it was 81% of employees are living with kind of lifestyle risk. The number's even higher when you factor in clinical risks as well. So we are seeing these risks, but as you say, perhaps the positive takeaway is there's an opportunity actually with some of these things that through the right interventions there are opportunities to make positive changes. I think one of the interesting things as well, just reflecting on obviously some of the changes we've seen in the world of work since COVID and the like, obviously the advent of kind of home working, hybrid working. I think I'm right in saying that we're seeing through the data that hybrid working in particular actually is having a positive impact on employee health and well-being.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, if there's a positive outcome from COVID, it actually made most people realise their health is really important. And actually then I spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day with my employer, and actually the employer has an obligation or could get involved in my health. So there was a push from employees to do more around their health. You talk about hybrid working, yeah, absolutely. We're seeing the trends very much in favour of hybrid working. So we see a reduction in mental health kind of problems. We see an increase in activity. If I'm at home for 2 or 3 days a week, I've got the opportunity to perhaps go walking the dog at lunchtime. Lots of people bought dogs during that lockdown period. They need walking, and that activity can now be done where it couldn't be done when you're working in the office all the time. So yeah, lots of positive trends, more so than even working at home full-time on your own. And I think that's where the kind of mental health element comes to it. We see that sense of community, the ability to go into the office and collaborate is still really important for people's mental health. So that combination works well from a hybrid perspective.
Absolutely. And it's been really interesting looking through some of the numbers. Like I say, just the kind of impact we see that there is that sort of reduction in mental health and stress, an increase in, I can't remember the number off my top of my head, but it was I think a marked increase in the amount of exercise hybrid workers were getting compared to say people that are working 100% from home or 100% in office. So some real positives there, I think.
Yeah, and I guess the last stat is that actually you see a 6% increase in people's job satisfaction by having that flexibility and by working in a hybrid fashion. So that from a board perspective, from an HR perspective, is really music to your ears. So we're not saying that a hybrid has to be the same for everyone, 2 days here or 3 days. It's a flex, and you've got to work with what you've got as a business unit. But you do see an increase in job satisfaction and engagement. Excellent.
I suppose one of the things, though, that hybrid working has sort of, the challenge that's thrown up for employers is that interventions now need to kind of extend outside of the typical work environment, and actually the employees are going to be engaging with this stuff from home. And I guess we also have to take into consideration the different needs of employers, and I think that was reflected in some of the numbers, the differences between sort of age groups. Like, perhaps you could just give us a little bit more on that, and kind of how we devise effective solutions with these things in mind.
Yeah, as you say, we're all different. I'm different to you. I think we were talking earlier, maybe I quite like a few too many chocolate biscuits. I need to have a slightly different intervention. I need to live perhaps a healthier lifestyle around the nutrition bit, and maybe you for activity-wise. So yeah, everyone's different. And what we've seen through the survey is that employers are throwing a lot of initiatives, healthy initiatives at their employees, 46 on average for the employers that we surveyed. But they do need to kind of pinpoint each individual need. And we've also seen this difference between the younger demographic needing something slightly different to the older demographic. And when I sort of talk about younger and older, I'm talking about under 35s needing a little bit more support around mental health and more support around financial, just general financial support. But they're often the slightly lower income group before they move on in their careers. And both of those sort of elements are also leading to things like burnout. So yeah, really important to make sure that you've got a comprehensive group of initiatives, but that actually then you take that next step on. And I'm sure you're going to ask me, how do you get kind of employees involved, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important point, isn't it? Is how do we, obviously, as a provider of health and wellbeing solutions, we've got access to a lot of data, and we've got obviously all of these findings we've gathered over the years. So, but yeah, how do we devise an effective solution? What are the key components of making that work?
The really big key component, if you kind of took an umbrella view of it, is behavioural science. We're funny creatures. We just don't always do what's good for us. And the starting point of that is actually, talking about behavioural science for a moment. We all have this sort of optimism bias. If we're not in hospital bed, we're fine. So the fact that I've turned up here today, I almost feel like, I don't have any health risks. Now, we all will have that. But if you start with that kind of premise that I don't have any health risks, I'm not going to interact with a health initiative. And certainly from the stats, we see that playing out. So of the 46 initiatives that all these companies are putting in place, you only get 25% engagement with them. And that's unfortunate. I mean, that's a lot of expense for not a lot of output. I mean, what I would say is when they do get engaged with those initiatives, they're really liking them. So 85% of that population who've got involved said they were really beneficial. Yeah. So how do we get more people engaged with these health initiatives? Well, the first bit, this optimism bias, let's overcome that. I do have some health risks, so that might be a health review and surfacing some of the problems that I might have. But the next bit that I always think is really, really difficult for an employer to put in place is rewards actually make us do something different. Yeah. I know I should do something different. I know I should run more often. But do you know what? If you gave me a reward for doing it, then I'm more likely to do it. And that is very difficult for an employer to put in place in a wellness program that they've created from various bits and pieces. It's the beauty of Vitality. It incorporates all of that in one package, and we do reward people, and we do get
we see that, the findings that we've published this year from the Britain's Healthiest Workplace survey, we're seeing that play out, aren't we? That actually that approach is effective. We are seeing real kind of different improvements in employee well-being and health as a consequence of having those sort of interventions.
Yeah, massive improvements. We're talking about sort of 8 to 10% greater activity for the population that we look after as an insurer versus other kind of products in the marketplace. We're talking about reduction in mental health problems by the tune of about 11% as well. So these interventions, when you're combining them with behavioural science, really do turn the dial. And look, if I have a really interesting incentive for doing it, I'm naturally, you piqued my interest. I want to go in and perhaps do something about it. I want to do mindfulness every day because I know I'm going to get a reward perhaps for doing it. Not just better health, but something kind of tangible.
That sort of tangible value, those rewards that just help to make it more effective, and we sort of drive that higher engagement. But I think we have advisors watching this as well. The employee benefits consultants that are advising their corporate and SME clients. So I suppose just to kind of wrap this up, all of these interesting findings from an advisor's perspective, might be wondering what can they do with this? How can that kind of inform the work they're doing in advising their corporate clients?
Look, I mean, we took a very conscious decision when we created Britain's Healthiest Workplace to make it completely independent. So the statistics that are coming out of it, we talked earlier, very, very relevant and very statistically relevant. That's what we call it. Health spans all kind of pretty much all product lines and all benefits that employers have in place. So here's an opportunity to use the statistics that come out of Britain's Healthiest Workplace as a platform for those conversations. I see that perhaps you've got inactivity here. It leads to kind of lower productivity. You might want to kind of consider these benefits and put those in place there. So, the fact that if you can encourage people to be a little bit healthier, it's going to help your life product. It's going to help your group income protection product. So it opens up I always think it's a great way of opening up the conversation for the intermediary community. As I say, it's independent research. We had some incredible kind of guidance on how to create this solution. So we had RAND Europe, very big research business. The FT supported in terms of getting the stats out there, and at the very, very start, the University of Cambridge helped us with the questions. So it's useful.
Yeah, and I think it demonstrates just kind of how important this is. It's something we can't ignore anymore. The challenges are such that we've got to address this. So look, that's been really, really interesting, Gary. I hope everybody watching has kind of found that really useful. I think really useful to kind of unpack those numbers. So thank you very much, and we'll hand back to Adam.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Gary. And some really interesting findings there. And Dame Carol, I know you're really close to the Britain's Healthiest Workplace data, and no doubt, Maggie, you've had a chance to look at it. Some of the interesting findings there, I mentioned at the outset, £139 billion worth of low productivity costing the economy. But also interesting, we just heard there that 90% of that low productivity is due to presenteeism. As opposed to absenteeism. And obviously what makes up presenteeism are some of the things we've already spoken about, right? Kind of like people coming in, feeling connected, invested in, and also investing into their work. So what makes up kind of, in your eyes, Dame Carol, kind of productivity at work and kind of where some of those costs, losses are coming from?
I think what in the past we haven't paid enough attention to is the contribution of health, both mental and physical, to productivity. We've really invested in machinery and making the workplace efficient, etc., all the techie stuff or business orientated stuff. But the economists haven't wanted to talk about the contribution of an individual's health to their ability to work. But my goodness, I mean, COVID really exposed that. So if you think about it, your health, mental particularly at the moment, if you're anxious, depressed, just plain stressed, you may be stressed about financial factors because we've had a cost of living crisis, but anything around that area, you will be present at work, but you won't be giving 100% because you're just not capable. You may have presenteeism because you've got a lot of family worries. You may have caring responsibilities. You can't help sometimes bringing these things to work. So again, anything an employer can do to recognise that people have lives and that they may have somebody in the family who's sick, may have a caring responsibility. And then physical health. What we've seen is we have more long-term chronic conditions. People are going to work with them, and they often have multiple conditions. So you might have diabetes and some arthritis in your knee, and you might have a bit of high blood pressure. All of those things affect your ability to be either in work or work effectively. And we've in the past, I believe, ignored health, or at least many people have ignored health, thought if only we have more efficient systems, our productivity will go up. You can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah. Interesting, your point earlier about EQ and the kind of the role of emotional intelligence within the workplace, and you've described a lot of the things that go into that there from an employer's responsibility. What about the line manager? Obviously an incredibly important kind of stakeholder in all of this. Are we putting too much onto the stakeholder, onto the line manager? How do we make sure that they're supported? And I'd be keen to hear both of your views on that.
Well, the line manager is just the crucial linchpin for me. And I think the first thing you have to do is worry about the health and well-being of your line managers, because there's very good research evidence that if they are mentally or physically not well, then they will affect the health of the people they manage. So it's not just about sending them on a course and sheep dipping them and say, we'll have you trained to be a good manager. It's about enabling them to understand human beings, to be people sensitive, so they can build a team and they can hear what their workers are saying to them. They can listen. I mean, a good manager needs to be able to listen. And then I don't expect them to know how to deal with mental health problems, but I like them to be able to signpost, to just say, you know, I really think it would be good if you went and took advice from A or tried one of our interventions. It's enabling that line manager to have enough confidence and ability to look after and get the best from the people they're managing.
And ensuring that those line managers are aware of those resources and those tools that are available. We heard from the Britain's Healthiest Workplace data that the 70% of employees are aware of interventions, but only 20% or so are actually using them. So there's an issue there with the communication or an opportunity there to communicate them better, signpost. But Maggie, from your side, what works and what doesn't when it comes to providing this kind of support in the workplace?
I think one, just to add on as well, I think it's really important for line managers to create their own community. You know, you're not working on your own, you're not in a silo, and I think that is really key. How do line managers work together to understand the challenges that they're all facing, but also just to share their challenges as well? So we spend a lot of time, not necessarily working with line managers, but generally working with a community of champions to share their challenges, but also find good practice. So creating that community is really important, because when you think about line managers as well, they're dealing with top down and also bottom up. So how do we ensure that they're able to share those challenges? And I think you've just touched on the other bit, is making sure that they're well equipped to deal with the challenges that they are presented with. So those two key bits are really important. But community is so vital in the forever changing environment that they're presented every day.
And gone are the days where it's a bowl of fruit on the desk and just left. You know, we need a holistic approach that takes on board the kind of the mental, the physical, as well as the emotional health of employees, as well as their financial health, given the cost of living crisis and the opportunity to provide well-being workshops. And it's not just a case of just kind of shoving something on Zoom and expecting them to show up and come away with the takeaway.
No, and I think you can break it down, can't you, you've got individual interventions. So you could offer an EAP, you could offer mindfulness, you might offer individual resilience training. I think you need, or financial education. I think you need to be aware of what you're putting in at the individual level. And if you can, get an idea of whether it's working, because if it's not working, you should just stop it or adapt it. And so that's your individual basket. And then the other things we've talked about, your leadership, board engagement, we haven't mentioned, but important. And then your line manager function, that's the culture, isn't it? It's the culture of your organisation, which is crucial.
I mean, it's starting from the top and it trickling down throughout the organisation is obviously very, very important. And when it comes to those interventions, Carol, would you say that less is sometimes more, or the data's telling us that just throwing more and more at it is not necessarily the best solution?
I think, if possible, you should look for interventions where there is some evidence. We don't have superb evidence, but we have best practice. And in some of the areas, we do have some research to help us. And I think you should not put 4 or 5 in at once. You know, why not put 1 or 2, but measure it and see whether you're having an effect? Because otherwise, you're not going to know, are you, which of these things. And before you put interventions in, what Britain's Healthiest Workplace is so good at is the survey you do tells an employer what is the size of their musculoskeletal problem, what is the size of their mental health problem, or their smoking levels, you know, or chronic disease. Then you can make your interventions targeted, so you can try and look at your baseline. What's your workforce like? Choose your interventions to match your challenges, and then, if possible, measure.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving over to you, Maggie, are there any parallels that you could draw from your time in sports, or changing tact a little bit? So obviously you're a World Cup winner, as you reminded us at the beginning of the conversation. Why has that experience been so helpful to you when it comes to you going into workplaces to try and cultivate the things you've discussed today? So better levels of community, more inclusivity, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, so I guess the work that I do in particular, we utilise athletes who have come from an elite background, that winning mindset, that high-performing environment, where they take that into a workplace environment and try and foster a real positive climate, which is about enabling the employees to want to focus on better well-being. So I guess what we've taken from that has been, okay, right, focus on, like you've touched on, don't go crazy and highlighting too many, I guess, initiatives, but actually focus on being quite targeted of what you try and do. So what is going to get the best reaction from working with your employees? So keeping it simple. We also try and focus on your strengths as well. So with regards to your business or your organisation, you know, what are the things that you are really good at, and actually what will people find themselves being engaged in? And I guess from the sporting context as well, it's all about learning. So we spend a lot of time especially with our athletes when they work with our clients, it's very much trial and error. It's okay to try these initiatives. If they don't work, okay, well, what's the next thing to do? So I guess those are 3 things that we tend to focus on.
And it's not just all HIIT classes and squats, right? I mean, it's kind of inclusive, kind of the sorts of productivity gains that all of us could benefit from.
Yeah, it's providing variety that will appeal to various different people, and actually then measuring them to ensure that we know that this is what works.
And how do we make sure that wellbeing programs are inclusive? And we've seen from the data as well that across different demographics, age groups, we're seeing disparities, and you know, how do we make sure that a wellbeing program appeals to all and it isn't in any way exclusive?
And I think you've got to really do some sort of almost definition of the groups in your workforce. So, for example, the young, they might prefer to do things on their phone and through apps, whereas a better middle-aged woman would probably quite like to do things in a group. Do you know, I think you've got to think, what are my demographics? What are the sorts of things that appeal to that age group? You must bear in mind ethnicity and culture. You know, there may be groups of women who, through their own cultural background, would wish to do things in certain ways. And if you want to enable them to participate and be fit, you have simply got to have thought very carefully about who's working for me, what are their age, sex, their orientation, etc. And you know, even their spirituality, the things that matter to them, and then try and make sure you've got a variety of interventions. As Maggie says, that you can try, but not expect them to work for everyone, because I think you'll find that these different sectors and people with disabilities may need you to think about their interventions in a different way, or neurodiversity. I mean, there's a whole host of things in a workplace.
We said at the outset that we've been through an enormous amount of change over the past 5 or so years in the UK, especially globally. So it's fair to say, isn't it, in a way, that kind of the pandemic was a bit of a waking up moment for us all and for society, but it's also been quite divisive as well. And there's quite a lot for employers here to unpack and navigate. So how are attitudes changing, just to kind of wrap up the conversation? And what advice would you give to employers that may be feeling a little bit bewildered, and you know, we've got talked through quite a lot of things that they have to try and get their head around. So what about those either consulting and advising employers or employers themselves? Any sort of thoughts on how attitudes are changing, and any kind of pearls of wisdom you can throw them?
You go first.
Oh, you fight amongst yourselves.
I'm an MBE, it's not saying.
I would say keep it simple. So to start with, because there's so much stuff out there, I would start with my organisational culture, with my leaders, and do the things that Maggie's been saying about leadership. I then want my board to be, if I've got a board, if I'm a small company, of course I may not have one, but to get the board engaged, then think about my managers, and then think, right, what are the few things that we're going to, whether through wellbeing champions, through your HR department, however you're going to do it, to decide the good things you can do that would make a difference. And we haven't discussed all the very obvious things like good nutrition. So if you can provide a good lunch, something that's nutritious, can you encourage people to be more active? I mean, I think you can keep some of these things pretty simple, and not confuse somebody with, you know, making them say, oh, they've got to do everything at once. Organisational culture and then targeted interventions would be the way I'd go.
Would you agree that employee wellbeing should be registered as a risk on a company risk register?
Well, I think health and wellbeing should be, yeah.
And the S in ESG, you mentioned earlier about that ESG conversation at board level. How much should we think about the social, the health and wellbeing elements?
Yeah.
And Maggie, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Yeah.
But I think Carol makes a really good point.
Yeah.
It is those small habitual changes that we can encourage in the workplace. Attitudes around prevention, more than ever, you know, people are more aware of the connections between our physical, mental and social health. We've covered it again today.
Yeah, keeping it simple, I think that's key. Don't be afraid to be courageously brave. I encourage leaders, businesses to take those risks and see where they land, rather than almost being conservative of our approaches when it comes to health and well-being. And I think you touched on there that whole be proactive rather than reactive. That's so important, especially when it comes to our people. How do we ensure that we're putting strategies in place to support our people rather than waiting for something to happen? I think just to add on to some of the other bits as well that I would encourage is very much hear from your people. You know, actually, what do they want? What are their needs? You know, what would they like to see? I think at Vitality we do that quite a lot now. We very much, I think we hear a lot from people, so we know how to almost guide us and nudge us in the right direction. So I say that that's really important, but also don't be afraid to lean on your leaders, because, you know, and trust them. I think that's been built up quite a lot, especially when we talk about health and well-being. You know, trust the fact that we are creating a climate that's about facilitating people's well-being rather than inhibiting it.
Cultivate and promote positivity in the workplace.
Well, your people are your profits, aren't they, really? I mean, you know, if you invest properly in your people and really try to understand them and support them, as Maggie says, then they will deliver for you, because they'll want to deliver.
Yeah, they're the lifeblood of the business, and without them the business cannot perform.
No, not at all.
So there you have it. Positivity breeds productivity in workplaces, which is good for businesses and good for its people too. Dame Carol and Maggie, thanks so much for joining me today, and thank you all for joining us as well. It's been another episode of Forward Thinking. See you next time. Bye-bye.